Hi, and welcome to our live event for Rouxbe. This is Dan Merrick. I'm here to help with the Ask Me Anything hours. So during this event, you are able to type in any questions for any of our chef instructors to be able to get really on live response for the questions you have for anything chef related. Again, my name is Dan Merrick. I'm the director of plant-based culinary. So primarily we'll be talking about plant-based items during this Ask Me Anything hours, but we can stray a little bit if we need to. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. To be able to ask a question, all you have to do is click in the window on the top right of this video, and you'll can just type in your question there, and then hit the Add button. The add button's a little black one underneath. It does go through moderation, so we will have somebody, Patrick, who is helping us with our videos, to moderate it, and then it'll come through in the queue on the right-hand side as well. So you'll see all the questions that we're going to go through on the right. If there is something that you really think that we want to get to right away, definitely hit that heart icon, and it'll actually bring it up to the top of our queue as well. So that being said, let's just jump right in and get started here. Our first question is actually from Bonnie. Bonnie is saying, I'm having trouble finding the items that you buy for assignments. Is it okay to use substitutes? I use lima beans or fava beans, also navy beans for cranberry beans. The minestrone soup was very delicious, though. So yes, Bonnie, that's actually something we highly encourage. If you can't find an ingredient, that's okay. Substitutions are totally great. It sounds like your substitutions were really good there. Each one of those, the navy for the cranberry, the fava instead of lima, or the other way around, totally work. Those are great things to be able to do. I can tell just by your recipe here that this is actually coming from the new Blue Zones course, which we launched a couple of weeks ago. That minestrone is fantastic. I love it. Dan Buettner himself says he eats that every single morning for breakfast. That's what he does for breakfast. I don't know if I'd be doing minestrone for breakfast every day, but it is a great recipe. And according to the Blue Zone diet, it's going to help you live longer, which is great. One of the wonderful things is all the different beans that you can put in that, and having different varieties is wonderful as well. There are a couple different minestrone recipes in the Blue Zones course and the cookbooks. I think we listed all the ones that are in the cookbooks for the minestrone as well. But you'll see there's a lot of different varieties you can take on the minestrone. If you ever do have problems finding a specific ingredient, you can always, write us to be able to look for support for those as well. I know that book very well, having helped develop the course, so you can always email me at dan@rouxbe.com, specifically for recipes out of the Blue Zones course. He does give a caveat at the beginning. Dan does, that says that there are some items you're not going to be able to find. It's kind of for certain regions, they have them, but we always do put substitutions nearby them as well. So if you can't find something like a bene seed, you can use a sesame seed instead. But thanks for asking, Bonnie. You can absolutely make substitutions, and we highly encourage it. Actually helps you to build out your repertoire of different flavor profiles too, which is great. All right, our next question here is from Teresa. No questions now, but appreciate the opportunity to hear responses to others' questions. Thank you. Thanks, Teresa, for joining us. And Fred, hi, what's the best way to replace the oil in chimichurri recipes? Okay, well, that's actually something you can do pretty easily with a chimichurri recipe. Now, there are other recipes that might be a little harder. Now, specifically a chimichurri is typically like an herb, it's a Spanish herb sauce, and it's usually parsley. Sometimes people put cilantro or basil in it, but primarily it's parsley forward. And it usually has a lot of oil in it, and then onions or green onions or something like that. Sometimes people put red pepper in it as well. Now, the great thing about doing an oil-free version of this is you still get all the herbs that really stand out in that. Now, the fat actually does help get that flavor profile across a little bit more. But because there's so many herbs in this and it's almost like a paste instead of a sauce, you can actually get away by just using vinegar instead. So I would probably go with a lighter vinegar, like a red wine vinegar. And maybe like you could do a balsamic if you really want to pop out a little bit of sweetness in the flavor as well too. But a red wine vinegar would actually be a nice substitute. So instead of using the oil, I'd go with maybe a red like a red wine vinegar. You could do one that's non-alcoholic based vinegar as well too, if you'd like to do that. But just balsamic, if you're using it, will just kind of bring out a different flavor profile a little bit, giving a little more sweet notes to it too. Um, Now you're not going to use like a 1-to-1 ratio on your vinegar versus oil. So if it's asking for say 2 tablespoons of oil, I might try maybe one tablespoon of, or if it's 2 tablespoons of oil, maybe 1 tablespoon of red vinegar. So red wine vinegar. Now you want to experiment with that a little bit. I typically do the chimichurri where I'll blend up the herbs and everything first and then add the liquid, and maybe a little bit of lime juice or lemon juice would be good in that too. So it's not just all the vinegar forward. Um, and that's going to actually be a nice kind of sauce to be able to coat any of the dishes you're looking to do. So that's probably what I would do for the no oil chimichurri recipe. It's just a nice little way to be able to add lots of flavor to a dish. Good luck with that, Fred. All right, so here's another one from Fred. A traditional Chinese ginger scallion sauce for chicken is made of ginger scallion, salt, and oil. How can we replace the oil? Tried with water, but it was not very successful. So this is going to be a little harder, just because the ginger scallion sauce is traditionally, I mean, that fat is kind of your binder. It keeps everything on together. And the way you traditionally make that kind of a sauce, it's kind of like a chili oil, right? So you take your ginger and your scallions, cut them up really finely. You can salt it as well, but then you typically take a hot oil and pour it over to be able to cook all of those things. So that's going to be very, very different without oil. Now you can try a host of different things to be able to kind of mimic the fat too, because that's actually the fat is helping to carry the flavor on that. But it's going to be really hard to be able to do that specific sauce. Now, the closest thing I can think of, just thinking off the top of my head here, would probably be something like a tahini sauce or something, where you can take tahini and water it down a little bit. But on this, you'd have to actually cook your ginger and your scallion first. You can use the salt if you want to, but cook that and then mix in your ginger and scallion in with the watered down tahini. You might want to put a little garlic in there too for flavor, but that's completely up to you as well. But that will actually make a sauce that can coat something as well. It's going to have your fat, but it's going to cook very differently than your original one was, because the other oil that you would use should just be a clear high heat oil. And when you're looking at that sauce, it's primarily oil is kind of what it is. So the closest I can think of would probably be a tahini. Or, if you could use other fats, that's fine. You could do like a cashew, like what we do for a cashew bechamel, where you soak the cashews and then blend them up and then use that as kind of your fat, and then put the ginger and scallion cooked again, of course, into that as well. But what we're kind of looking for is a fat to be able to get those flavors, the ginger and scallion in there. Now, after doing that, cooking your ginger, your scallion, then incorporating it into the tahini or the cashew, whatever you want to, you probably want to let it soak in there and sit for a while, probably overnight, to be able to help the fat absorb some of the flavor from the ginger and the scallions as well. But either way, you're going to be using a lot of ginger and a lot of scallion for those sauces. I hope that helps. That's a little hard one to do, no oil, and I've never tried that. That's just thinking off the top of my head where I would probably go with that. But I hope that helps, Fred. All right, from Melanie. Hello, and thank you, Chef Dan. I eat a whole food, plant based diet as well, and no oil. I've been trying to find a buttery tasting spread for toast. So far, I've only cooked a cauliflower recipe, which is tasty on veggies, but not so much for toast. Any ideas? Yes, actually, there's a great recipe that Chef Chad Sarno developed for us years ago called roasted garlic butter. And you can actually see I posted a link for it here in Rouxbe. And basically, it's cashew base. So you basically soak cashews, blend them up, and then he does like an onion and garlic where you roast it in the oven and then blend all that together with the cashews, and that makes a great kind of a savory butter you can do on that. Now, if you're looking for something that's not savory, you can actually you can just take the cashew part of that as well, and just do the cashew kind of version of that as well. So that's probably where I would go with that, is the garlic butter. Or if you don't want it as garlic, you just don't put the garlic in, and just use the cashew section of that recipe. Sorry, I'm a little stuffy just from allergies here, but bear with me there. All right, so Michael, hello, I'm looking for a simple multi-grain bread recipe to make. Do you have a good recipe? I've made sourdough in the past and enjoyed the bread. However, the starter's hard to maintain, especially if you leave on vacation. Thanks. Yes, I have the same problem with starters and sourdough as well. I did find actually you can restart sourdough starters, so even like a month or so in, which is great, just by feeding it again, dumping off the excess like kind of oil and stuff that comes off the top, and then feeding it again as you normally would before. So you can actually restart it even if you do go on vacation and you come back. So whole grain bread recipes. There's actually a chef I know. His name is Peter Reinhardt, and he is by far the person that I recommend for doing whole grain bread recipes. I don't have a link for it, but Patrick might be able to put one in there on the fly quickly. But it's a whole grain breads. When I worked at Whole Foods Market, he developed whole grain breads for us that were also no oil. There are, I think, a couple of those in here, including maybe the pizza crust is in here. But really good book for doing whole grain bread, specifically to be able to not, have them taste like whole grain, if you will. But just wonderful recipes in here. Great commentary. Peter Reinhardt, check out his book. There are also a lot of other bread makers out there that do whole grain, so you might want to just kind of do a little bit of searching through some of those as well. My wife does a lot of different breads. She's kind of got like family recipes that she's used, but they're not whole grain. So Peter Reinhardt, I do love the stuff that he's done. So definitely check out that book when you get a chance for it as well. Thanks, Patrick, for putting that one in there. All right, so Deborah, can you please talk about what we can use in the place of salt to season food? What, in your experience, works best? I use some salt, but like to keep it minimal. I'm actually the same way. I barely use salt at all, only when it's absolutely necessary. Now, what I do for this, Deborah, is I actually try to use fresh herbs as much as possible. Because as much as I do love using dried herbs, fresh herbs just add that much more flavor right away. So the freshest, most local ingredients you can find are going to give you more flavor. And that's really what chefs are adding salt to dishes for, is to add more flavor. So the more local and the more fresh you can find your ingredients, you're going to get that flavor just naturally out of the food. So I will typically source using farmers markets or different things like that, or just getting fresh herbs from your local grocer. Much better way to be able to get a lot of big flavor out of things. So if you're using a little bit of fresh herb in each of the dishes that you're doing, you're going to get a lot more of that pop of flavor to be able to come out. And by far use way less salt just because of that at the same time. So that's usually my trick to be able to get the most flavor out of foods, and replacing salt is just by using the freshest ingredients that I can, and getting them as local, just because the closer you are to the source that the food is being picked, the less it has time to start decomposing on the drive there, right? So it loses its flavor after it's being picked. So that as soon as you can get it, right when it's picked, the better. Hope that helps, Deborah. All right, Nancy. I like that soaking beans eliminates indigestible sugars. Some Instapot recipes say you do not have to pre-soak the beans. Does a pressure cooker destroy these sugars? And should I pre-soak when using a pressure cooker to prevent easiness? No, actually, the pressure cookers are the way that they cook. They actually completely break that down, so you don't need to pre-soak your bean. If you want to, you still can. It'll actually go even quicker, but it's usually the indigestible. There's also a protein in there that it's broken down as well. So those are broken down when you're cooking in an Instapot. It's very different for that, compared to a regular cooking. So you don't actually have to soak a bean before cooking up in the pressure cooker or in the Instapot, which is the same thing essentially. But really great, great thing. You don't have to do that. It makes it much, much faster, which I definitely like. All right. So next one is from Lily. Hi, Chef Dan. Do you have to keep your peanut butter or tahini in the fridge? You actually don't. So here is a link that I provided from the National Peanut Board on basically different lengths that you can keep peanut butter. It's quite long, actually. They typically say about 3 months out of the fridge is fine to be able to keep it. And then after 3 months, to keep it another 3 months, you want to put it in the refrigerator. I typically don't keep it in the fridge. I don't keep tahini. I do keep tahini in the fridge, which is very different. But I usually, after I open tahini, I put it in the fridge. But peanut butter, I typically keep on the counter. My family goes through peanut butter quite often, especially with different peanut noodle dishes that I do. And the kids love peanut butter with apples and stuff like that. So we go through peanut butter pretty quickly. Now, what happens if you don't? Well, basically, they say that it's going to separate out a lot easier, right? So, a lot of the oils will actually start to separate out. You get more of the oil at the top compared to it mixed in all together. I always try to buy natural peanut butter, which nothing added to it. So, if you read the label, a lot of people will add salt and sugar and oil to peanut butter. I typically try to get one that doesn't have any of those. The closer to fresh ground peanut butter is kind of what I like to use. Same with tahini. Sometimes it's a little more expensive, but those actually, a little more worth it. Now, some of those I might refrigerate a little quicker than I would letting one sit out as well. But I typically buy those in just the amount of quantity that I'm just going to use within a week or two too. So doesn't so the short answer is that peanut butter does not have to be in the fridge unless it's about 3 months afterward. Tahini, I typically put it in the fridge right away, but I'll probably guess that they would probably say the same thing with tahini, that after you open it, it can stay out as well. I just like to keep it refrigerated. All right, so next one is from Catherine. In a Forks Over Knives Ruby course, will I be able to access the recipe and information tips after I complete the course? Yes, you will. It's one of the great things about those courses is you are able to access the recipes, the tips, and all of your assignments from before. So you can always go back to the different tasks to take a look and see maybe there's a recipe you didn't do. You did one for a test, but you didn't do the other one. So it's great to be able to go back to those two. It's a wonderful resource to be able to have. Think of it almost like a cookbook on your shelf. All right, next one is from Nancy as well. What percentage does soaking beans reduce cooking time for an Instant Pot? I don't see recipes for pre-soaking beans in the pressure cooking recipes. Oh, so this is from Nancy. You asked the pressure cooker one as well. So again, you typically don't have to soak them before putting them in an Instant Pot. Most of them don't say you have to pre-soak. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen one for an Instant Pot that you soak the beans in. As far as soaking beans to reduce cooking time, the Instant Pot makes beans so fast. Instead of like waiting for 45 minutes to cook beans, you can do it in 10 minutes, which is fantastic. So I typically wouldn't even pre-soak the beans if I'm using the Instant Pot. All right, so Christiana, I never refrigerate tomatoes uncut. To me, they taste metallic and lack flavor. My daughters believe refrigeration keeps them fresh longer. What is your take on the tomato refrigeration? Well, Christiana, I am totally on your side with this. I always tell people don't refrigerate your tomatoes. For looking on what way you should be, what you should be refrigerating and not, think of the way you buy them at the grocery store. You never find tomatoes refrigerated at the grocery store because they do. They change the texture and the flavor of them. So you typically want to keep your tomatoes out on a shelf or in your pantry or something like that. And you don't want to refrigerate them until you cut them open. When you cut them open and you have some left over, then you do want to refrigerate. Now, a pro tip on this is when you're going to use that sliced or cut tomato, take it out of the refrigerator and let it cool down to room temperature before actually using it, and the flavor will come back a little bit more as well. But do not refrigerate your tomatoes unless they're already cut open and you've already used them. And then after you've used them, let them come back down to room temperature before using them. You'll get a lot more flavor out of them as well. I typically try to, wrap them in plastic or just keep them in a container to be able to get the freshness out of those as well. And the texture will change after you put it in the refrigerator, just so you know. All right, this one's from Sylvia. Hi, Chef. When a dessert recipe such as peanut butter cookies calls for unsalted butter and a separate teaspoon of salt, will using salted butter alter the flavor considerably? Also, can I ensure that my peanut butter cookies come out soft? So typically, unsalted butter is used for baking and salted butter is used for more savory items. Now, if this recipe is calling for unsalted butter and then, a separate teaspoon of salt, you're basically adding the salt back into it. Now, the specific amount is yet to be determined. A lot of people actually use a salted butter because there's more moisture content in the butter as well. So I would probably stick to the recipe to be able to make sure that you're getting those soft cookies at the same time. Yeah, and let me just read this, ensure that my peanut butter, yeah, come out soft. So I would probably stick to the recipe as much as you can on this. If you're trying to reduce the salt, the salted butter versus a teaspoon of salt are probably going to be pretty equal, but I'd have to measure to be able to see what kind of butter you're using compared to other ones as well. If it's a vegan butter, if it's a regular butter, there's a lot of equations that can happen to that. So it's typically better to be able to stick to the recipe if you can. Hope that helps, Sylvia. All right, so Cynthia, any guidelines for choosing flaxseed meal or chia seed as an egg replacement in some cookie and muffin recipes? Qualities of results, I've seen both used. Thank you for all this great information. So, Cynthia, that is a very experimental thing, I have to tell you. So, and what I mean by experimental is you have to experiment it a little bit with your own. So cookie and muffin recipes can be completely different from each other, just depending on the ingredients that are in them. But I have personally used both flax or chia seed as an egg replacer in cookie or muffin recipes. Both work exceedingly well, depending on the use case for them. But I've always had to experiment with them, especially with muffins, to be able to get that nice softness in them. And what I'll typically do is make small batches of things and give it a shot. So instead of baking like a dozen muffins, I'll just make enough to be able to make one muffin and try it with maybe the flaxseed in one and then the chia seed in another, and then bake them off at the same temp, same time, to be able to see which one turns out the best. Once you get the one that works best for you, keep the recipe and remember it. So the next time I make blueberry muffins, I'm going to use the chia seed in it as my egg replacer, or maybe the flaxseed worked out better. Now, each of those are going to have different things where one of the muffins might rise a little bit more, one might be a little softer, the tooth feel might be a little bit different, but it really does come down to a little bit of experimentation on your part to see which one you like best. All right. I hope that helps. It's not really a great answer to be able to tell you this is exactly it, but it really does involve a little bit of experimentation to help you on that path. So I hope that helps a little bit, Cynthia. Aquafaba, by the way, another great egg replacer. All right. So Veronica, registered for the Ultimate Plant-Based course, says I have 3 months to complete. What is the time from ordering or from starting? I believe it's from starting, but you might want to contact our support desk here. John or Dee are great people to talk to, and they can help you with the course to be able to see exactly when it starts. So you can actually just email info@rouxbe.com, and they will gladly help you with when you need to be able to add those into it. So I hope that helps. Oh, Cynthia got one in here too. All right. So, Cynthia, regarding peanut butter without the added sugar, fats, and salts, I saw that Whole Foods has it in their bulk section, a place where you can get fresh peanut butter or other nut butters. They have a machine which makes the butters right there. You are so right, Cynthia. I used to work at Whole Foods for years. Worked on the floor in the actual stores as well, and they typically do have machines that will grind peanuts into fresh peanut butter, along with almond butter, which is great. I have seen that at other co-ops across the country too. So, in natural food stores, will actually just put in fresh nuts and they will grind them to be able to make them. So, if I'm getting fresh, that's typically where I'm getting it from. It's just getting it ground up to be able to, get the freshest flavor out of it. And it's. I know there's nothing else added to it, right? There's no binders or weird chemical stuff. There's no salt or oil added into it because all those just making peanut butter should just be the peanuts, in my opinion. I mean, there are certain times where I'm actually going to buy, like a regular jar to be able to have it, sit longer. And I usually do those for sauces and stuff like that. But when I'm just looking for, like, especially when my kids are just eating peanut butter on an apple, I'm going to try to go fresh as often as possible, just to be able to get the full flavor, all the nutrients, and just make sure that the nuts are good quality nuts that they're putting in there. But you can find that on a multitude of different places. Whole Foods is great at doing that in their bulk section. I have a local co-op here in Madison that does the same thing, but I've also seen them in Arizona and then Texas as well. As far as co-ops or natural food stores, a lot of their bulk sections do have those. So great way to be able to get your natural almond butters or natural peanut butters as well too. Thanks for the question, Cynthia. All right, that was a quick one today. So that, I guess, concludes our session for today's Ask Me Anything hours. You guys have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.